Will Rogers, the Cherokee cowboy philosopher who became America's most beloved humorist, was born William Penn Adair Rogers on November 4, 1879, in the Indian Territory that would later become Oklahoma. He came from a prominent Cherokee family, the son of Clement Van Rogers, a successful rancher and Cherokee leader, and Mary America Shrimpshire Rogers. The Rogers family was part of the Cherokee Nation's elite, wealthy by frontier standards, with vast landholdings and cattle herds. Young Will grew up in a world that was simultaneously traditional and vanishing, a frontier society that was being rapidly transformed by railroads, settlement, and the approaching end of the Indian Territory's independence. Rogers' early years were marked by both privilege and restlessness. He was the youngest of 8 children, though only 3 survived to adulthood. His mother died when he was 10 years old, a loss that affected him deeply throughout his life. His father was a stern, ambitious man who expected his son to follow him in ranching and business, but young Will was more interested in roping and riding than in schoolwork or business affairs. He attended several schools, including the Willie Halsell College in Vinita and Kemper Military Academy in Missouri, but he was an indifferent student who preferred practicing rope tricks to studying. His natural talent with a lariat was evident from childhood, and he could perform rope tricks that amazed even experienced cowboys. In 1898, Rogers left school for good and returned to the family ranch. He worked as a cowboy, participating in roundups and learning the skills that would later serve him well in show business. But the life of a rancher did not satisfy his restless spirit. The open range was disappearing, fenced in by barbed wire and divided into farms. The romantic cowboy life that Rogers loved was already becoming a memory, preserved only in Wild West shows and rodeos. Rogers felt confined by the expectations of his family and community. He wanted adventure, excitement, and a chance to see the world beyond the Indian Territory. In 1902, Rogers left home and traveled to Argentina, planning to work on ranches in South America. He spent several months in Argentina, working as a cowboy and experiencing ranch life in a different culture. But Argentina did not provide the adventure he sought, and he soon moved on to South Africa. There, Rogers found work with Texas Jack's Wild West Show, a traveling entertainment that performed for British colonial audiences. Rogers started as a horse wrangler, but his rope tricks soon earned him a spot in the show as a performer. He billed himself as the Cherokee Kid, performing rope tricks while riding horses at full gallop. His act combined genuine cowboy skills with showmanship, and audiences loved it. Rogers traveled throughout South Africa with various shows, then to Australia and New Zealand, working his way around the world. He returned to the United States in 1904, having spent nearly 2 years performing abroad. He had discovered his calling as an entertainer, and he was determined to make a career in show business. He joined various Wild West shows and circuses, performing his rope tricks at county fairs and vaudeville theaters. His act was purely physical at first, demonstrating his remarkable skill with a lariat without speaking. He could rope anything, performing tricks that seemed impossible, spinning multiple loops at once, roping horses and riders, creating intricate patterns in the air. In 1905, Rogers got his big break when he was hired to perform at Madison Square Garden in New York City. His act was a sensation, and he was soon performing in top vaudeville theaters throughout the country. But Rogers realized that his silent rope act, while impressive, had limitations. Other performers could talk and interact with audiences, making personal connections that a silent act could not achieve. Rogers began adding comments to his act, making casual observations about current events and politics while performing his rope tricks. His comments were humorous and irreverent, delivered in a folksy Oklahoma drawl that audiences found charming. He discovered that people laughed at his jokes as much as they applauded his rope tricks. Rogers' speaking style was unique. He spoke as if he were chatting with friends, rambling from one topic to another, making observations that seemed spontaneous but were actually carefully crafted. He developed a persona as a simple cowboy who was just commenting on what he read in the newspapers. His humor was gentle and inclusive rather than mean-spirited. He made fun of politicians and public figures, but in a way that seemed affectionate rather than vicious. His most famous line, which he repeated often, was that he never met a man he did not like. This generosity of spirit, combined with his wit, made him beloved by audiences across the political spectrum. In 1908, Rogers married Betty Blake, a woman from Arkansas whom he had courted for several years. Betty was educated and refined from a respectable middle-class family, and she had initially been reluctant to marry a vaudeville performer. But Rogers persisted, and Betty eventually agreed to marry him. Their marriage was happy and enduring, lasting until Rogers' death. Betty managed their household and raised their 4 children while Rogers traveled constantly for his performances. She was his anchor and advisor, providing stability and good judgment that balanced his impulsive nature. They had 4 children who survived infancy, and Rogers was a devoted father who wrote letters home constantly when traveling. Rogers' career continued to grow throughout the 1910s. He became one of the highest-paid performers in vaudeville, commanding fees that made him wealthy. He appeared in the Ziegfeld Follies, the most prestigious variety show in America, from 1916 to 1925. In the Follies, Rogers performed his rope tricks and delivered monologues commenting on current events and politics. He would come on stage with a newspaper, pretending to read the day's news and making humorous observations. His act was topical and fresh, changing every night to reflect the latest events. Audiences never knew exactly what he would say, which gave his performances an excitement that scripted acts could not match. Rogers' humor was rooted in common sense and skepticism toward pomposity and pretension. He made fun of Congress, saying that America had no distinctly criminal class except Congress. He joked about presidents, senators, and world leaders, but always in a way that suggested they were foolish rather than evil. He criticized policies and actions, but rarely attacked individuals personally. His political humor was bipartisan. He made fun of Republicans and Democrats equally, which allowed audiences of all political persuasions to enjoy his act. He presented himself as an ordinary American who could see through the nonsense of politicians and experts. In the 1920s, Rogers expanded his career beyond vaudeville. He began writing a weekly column for newspapers, which was eventually syndicated to hundreds of papers across the country. His column was written in his distinctive voice, with unconventional spelling and grammar that reflected his speaking style. He wrote about politics, current events, and everyday life, offering observations that millions of Americans read every week. He also wrote a daily telegram, a short commentary of a few sentences that appeared in newspapers. Between his weekly column and daily telegram, Rogers reached an enormous audience, becoming one of the most widely read writers in America. Rogers also entered the new medium of motion pictures. He appeared in silent films in the 1920s, playing cowboy roles that showcased his riding and roping skills. When talking pictures arrived, Rogers became an even bigger movie star. His natural speaking style and personality translated well to film, and he appeared in over 70 movies during his career. He played folksy, common-sense characters who solved problems through practical wisdom and humor. His films were enormously popular, and he became one of Hollywood's top box office draws. By the early 1930s, Rogers was one of the most famous and beloved people in America, known through his stage performances, newspaper columns, and movies. Rogers' political commentary during the 1920s and 1930s was influential beyond mere entertainment. He had opinions on every major issue of the day, and politicians paid attention to what he said. He was skeptical of prohibition, calling it a noble experiment that was not working. He criticized the stock market speculation of the 1920s, warning that it would end badly. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, Rogers' commentary became more serious, though still humorous. He criticized politicians for not doing enough to help ordinary Americans. He supported Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs, believing that government should help people in distress. He traveled extensively during the Depression, visiting drought-stricken areas and raising money for relief efforts. Rogers' political views were difficult to categorize. He was a Democrat by registration but independent in his thinking. He supported some progressive reforms but was skeptical of big government. He believed in individual initiative and self-reliance, but also thought the government had a responsibility to help citizens in genuine need. He was an internationalist who believed America should engage with the world, but he was also skeptical of foreign entanglements that might lead to war. His views reflected those of many ordinary Americans who did not fit neatly into ideological categories. This made him an effective commentator because people of different political persuasions could find something to agree with in his observations. Rogers maintained his connection to aviation throughout his life. He was fascinated by flying and became friends with many pioneering aviators. He flew as a passenger whenever possible, accumulating more air miles than almost any other civilian of his era. He wrote about aviation frequently, promoting its development and advocating for government support of the industry. He believed that aviation would transform transportation and bring the world closer together. His enthusiasm for flying was genuine and infectious, and he helped popularize aviation at a time when many Americans were still skeptical of the new technology. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Rogers also engaged in extensive travel and lecture tour. He visited Europe, Asia, and Latin America, writing about his experiences for his newspaper column. His travel writing was observant and humorous, offering insights into foreign cultures and politics. He met with world leaders, including Mussolini, Stalin, and various European heads of state. He approached these meetings with his characteristic irreverence, treating dictators and kings as he would any other person. His accounts of these meetings were popular with American readers who enjoyed seeing powerful figures humanized and occasionally deflated by Rogers' humor. Rogers' radio career began in the late 1920s and became increasingly important in the 1930s. His radio broadcasts reached millions of listeners, and his voice became as familiar to Americans as his written words. He had a weekly radio show where he commented on current events, told jokes, and occasionally performed rope tricks, though of course the audience could not see them. His radio persona was the same as his stage and written persona, a simple cowboy philosopher offering common-sense observations on the news. His broadcasts were among the most popular on radio, and he was paid handsomely for them. Despite his enormous success and wealth, Rogers remained remarkably unpretentious. He lived comfortably but not ostentatiously, maintaining a ranch in California where he could ride and rope. He was generous with his money, giving to charities and helping people in need. He performed countless benefit shows, raising money for disaster relief and other causes. He never forgot his roots in Indian territory, and he remained proud of his Cherokee heritage throughout his life. He supported Native American causes and spoke out against the injustices that Native Americans faced. He was a member of the Cherokee Nation and maintained connections to Oklahoma throughout his life. Rogers' humor evolved with the times, but his essential approach remained consistent. He believed that humor should bring people together rather than divide them. He avoided humor based on ethnicity, religion, or personal misfortune. His jokes were about ideas, policies, and the follies of public figures who had chosen to be in the spotlight. He believed that democracy required the ability to laugh at ourselves and our leaders, that taking ourselves too seriously was dangerous. His humor served a democratic function, deflating pomposity and reminding powerful people that they were servants of the public. By the mid-1930s, Rogers was at the peak of his fame and influence. He was earning enormous sums from his various activities, movies, radio, newspapers, and personal appearances. He was probably the most famous person in America, recognized everywhere he went. Politicians sought his endorsement, and his opinions on public affairs were taken seriously. He had achieved a level of cultural influence that few entertainers have ever reached. He was not just a comedian or a performer, he was a national institution, a voice that millions of Americans trusted and enjoyed. In August 1935, Rogers embarked on a trip to Alaska with Wiley Post, a famous aviator who had set numerous flying records. Post was testing a hybrid airplane, combining parts from different aircraft to create a plane suitable for exploring Alaska. Rogers wanted to write about Alaska for his newspaper column, and he enjoyed flying with Post, whom he considered a friend. They departed from Seattle on August 6th, planning to fly to Alaska and then across to Siberia. The trip was supposed to be a combination of adventure and journalism, allowing Rogers to see new places and write about them for his audience. The flight to Alaska was uneventful, and Rogers sent back dispatches describing the scenery and the people he met. On August 15, 1935, Rogers and Post took off from Fairbanks, heading north toward Point Barrow, the northernmost point in Alaska. They stopped at a lagoon near Point Barrow to ask directions from local Inupiat people. After receiving directions, they took off again, but the engine failed shortly after takeoff. The plane crashed into the lagoon, killing both Rogers and Post instantly. They were found by the local residents who had just given them directions. The news of Rogers' death shocked the nation. Rogers' death was front-page news across America and around the world. Tributes poured in from every segment of society, from presidents and movie stars to ordinary citizens who felt they had lost a friend. His funeral was held in California, and it was attended by thousands of people. He was buried in a temporary grave while a memorial was planned. Eventually, he was buried in Claremore, Oklahoma, near his birthplace, in a memorial that also honored his wife Betty, who died in 1944. The memorial in Claremore became a shrine for his admirers, visited by thousands of people every year. Rogers' legacy extended far beyond his death. His writings continued to be read, and his films continued to be shown. His observations on politics and human nature remained relevant, and his humor retained its appeal. He had helped define a particularly American type of humor, folksy and self-deprecating, skeptical of authority but fundamentally optimistic about people. His influence can be seen in later humorists and commentators who combined humor with political commentary. He demonstrated that entertainment and serious commentary were not mutually exclusive, that humor could illuminate truth as effectively as solemn analysis. The state of Oklahoma claimed Rogers as its favorite son, and numerous institutions were named in his honor. Will Rogers Memorial Museum in Claremore preserves his legacy and houses collections of his writings, films, and personal effects. Will Rogers World Airport in Oklahoma City bears his name. Statues and memorials to Rogers exist throughout Oklahoma and in other states. His home in California became a state park. These memorials reflect the affection that Americans felt for Rogers and the desire to preserve his memory for future generations. Rogers' political commentary, while dated in its specific references, remains surprisingly relevant in its general insights. His skepticism toward political promises, his awareness that special interests influence government, his belief that common sense often gets lost in political debates, these observations apply to any era. His ability to criticize without being mean, to point out foolishness without being cruel, represents a type of political humor that is always valuable. He showed that it was possible to be politically engaged without being partisan, to care about public affairs without being ideological. Rogers' success came from authenticity. He was not playing a character on stage, he was essentially being himself, or at least a version of himself that audiences could relate to. His Oklahoma drawl was real, his cowboy skills were genuine, his observations came from his own reading and thinking. He did not pretend to be an expert or an intellectual. He presented himself as an ordinary American who happened to have a gift for expressing what many people were thinking. This authenticity made him trustworthy in a way that more polished performers were not. People believed that Rogers meant what he said and that he was not putting on airs. The breadth of Rogers' career was remarkable. He succeeded in vaudeville, Broadway, motion pictures, radio, and newspapers. He was a performer, writer, and commentator. He was equally comfortable roping steers and dining with presidents. He could entertain rural audiences and sophisticated urban crowds. This versatility reflected genuine talent and intelligence. Rogers was far more educated and thoughtful than his folksy persona suggested. He read extensively, thought deeply about issues, and crafted his humor carefully. The appearance of spontaneity in his performances was actually the result of preparation and skill. Rogers represented a particular moment in American culture, the transition from rural to urban, from frontier to modern industrial society. He embodied frontier values of independence, practical skill, and common sense, but he functioned in the modern world of mass media and celebrity. He helped Americans navigate this transition by showing that traditional values could coexist with modern life. His humor bridged the gap between old and new, rural and urban, traditional and modern. He made change seem less threatening by demonstrating that fundamental human nature remained constant even as society transformed. Perhaps Rogers' greatest achievement was making Americans laugh at themselves without feeling insulted. He deflated pretension and pomposity, but he did so with such good humor that even his targets could appreciate the joke. He showed that democracy required the ability to laugh at our leaders and ourselves, that taking politics too seriously was dangerous. His humor was a form of democratic participation, a way for ordinary citizens to assert their equality with the powerful. When Rogers made fun of a senator or president, he was reminding everyone that these were public servants, not masters, and that they deserved respect but not reverence. Rogers' death at age 55 cut short a career that might have continued for many more years. Had he lived, he would have commented on World War II, the post-war era, and the many changes that transformed America in the mid-20th century. His perspective on these events would have been valuable, and his humor might have helped Americans through difficult times, but perhaps his death in 1935 at the height of his fame and influence was fitting. He did not live to see his style of humor become old-fashioned, his persona become dated, or his influence diminish. He remained forever at his peak, preserved in memory as he was in life, the cowboy philosopher who made America laugh. In the end, Will Rogers was more than an entertainer, he was a cultural figure who helped define American identity in the early 20th century. He represented American values of humor, common sense, and democracy. He showed that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, that a cowboy from Indian territory could have insights that eluded educated experts. He proved that humor was not trivial but essential, a way of maintaining perspective and humanity in a complex world. His legacy includes not just his specific jokes and observations, but an approach to life that valued authenticity, kindness, and the ability to laugh at ourselves. This legacy continues to resonate with Americans who recognize in Rogers a reflection of their own values and aspirations.